Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. I have been tagged. This is the "why haven't I read these books yet" tag. So I was tagged by my friend Scott, the bald booktuber, and I very much so enjoyed his video and pretty much everything he picked. I was like, yeah, why haven't I read those either? So I'm going to leave a link to his video so you can definitely check it out. And I've seen several other of these floating around. It's a pretty fun tag and a lot of people are doing it. So I am happy to jump in and add my thoughts to the conversation because these are all books that I was like, really though, like why haven't I read these books yet? I did add a layer to my personal challenge when picking my books. I decided that I would pick books that I already own because sure, there's a lot of books that I am like, before I die I have to read that book or whatever, but the reason I haven't read it yet, I'm just going to tell myself, is because like you don't own it yet. You literally have an entire library of books behind you. So when you're really asking yourself, why haven't I read this book yet? It should probably come from one you already own because like you really have no excuse if you already own it, right? Okay, so this should be pretty short. There's only 5 questions. I don't know who created this tag, and I will try to find out because I like to give credit where credit is due, but also I would have made this tag a little differently if I was doing it myself because I don't feel like the questions are specific enough and there's going to be a lot of crossover, or there could be. So personally, I would have been a little more specific and asked more questions, but I'm going to go with it as is. 5 questions, why haven't you read these books yet? So the first one is a classic, and I'm just going to be so straight and upfront with you guys. I have not read that many classics. And I don't really know why. I mean, I think it's because, like, I was homeschooled, so we read a lot. Like, I always thought I was pretty well read. But now that I'm looking through these lists of, like, must-read classics, and over at Mike's Discord, we have a bunch of people that are monthly reading, like, a different classic each month. And, like, every single one of them, I'm like, yeah, I haven't read that yet either. So I'm not well-read when it comes to classics. But I have, over the last couple years, challenged myself to pick up more books that are over 100 years old. And they've pretty much all been horror books, but I've really, really liked all of them. Like, the writing style, the pacing, just the language that's used, the way that the story is formatted. It's different. Like, it is different from modern writing styles, but I really enjoy it. So I'm hoping for 2023, I would like to read more classics. I don't do very well with like a super formatted month, but I would like to say going forward in 2023, I hope to read one classic each month. So we'll see if I stick with that. But all in all, I want to read more classics. So I just went ahead and picked one that I feel like most people will be like, well, you haven't read that? And I'm going to pick A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I don't have a physical copy of it. It is on my wish list, but I have a Kindle copy of it, and I have it on audiobook. But I have this very, 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 very old copy of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, which I also haven't read. So I'm going to hold it, and we're going to pretend like it's A Tale of Two Cities. But basically, this is one that I'm really like, why haven't you read this? It's not very long. I read the synopsis about like what it's about. It sounds very, very interesting, and it seems to be beloved. It seems like most people who read it, you know, modern readers will be like, that book was awesome. So that is like the top of my list on like classics that I'm like, okay, girl, like you need to stop making excuses, be a grown-up, and just read some classics. And that's one I hope to get to sooner rather than later. So the next category on the list was fiction. Like that's all it said, was fiction. Well, everything I read is fiction. So I think what was intended with the question was probably like literary fiction, or what I call regular books. And to be honest, I don't have like a huge list of literary fiction that I'm just like, oh my gosh, I just got to get to it. How come I haven't read it yet? Because it's just not my bag. Like I mostly read fantasy with some sci-fi and horror mixed in, but really like fantasy is my bag. So I pretty much only read regular books, as I refer to them, when they are strongly recommended to me. So I am very open to it, and I am open to suggestions down in the comments. I'm not promising I'll read them right away, but I am wanting to read more regular books. Like it feels like a very grown-up thing to do. So like I said, I'm going with stuff that's already on my shelves, and I don't have a lot. other than like, again, like I have some things like Where the Crawdads Sing and that like Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, like things that I think what I will like and are probably good, but I don't lay awake at night and ask myself like, why haven't you read that yet? Because I mean, I know the answer. I'm just not that interested in them. Like I'm sure I will read them. I'm sure I'll enjoy them. That I might even love them. But I know why, because it's just not what like grabs me. I'm, like I said, I'm more of a genre person. So I went ahead, I picked a couple, if that's not cheating. I picked The Life of Pi, and the reason I asked myself, why haven't you read this, is because it's not very big, and it seems to be really, really good. And I have not even seen the movie. Like, I know, you guys, I know. But this book, I do find the concept of it interesting, and I do want to read this. And when I see it on my shelf, I do catch myself going, why haven't you read that yet? I don't know if this counts because I think this is technically considered philosophical fiction. Is that genre? I don't know. But Life of Pi, why haven't you read this yet? The other one could have gone into that classics section just as easily. But this is a book that I genuinely ask myself, why haven't you read that? Every time I go past it with my little eyeballs, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. I love the movie. Like Jim Caviezel, get out of here. I love that movie. And I love the Wishbone episode. Did anybody else watch Wishbone on PBS? But I don't know why I haven't read that book yet. And it's probably the sheer size of it. It's a huge book. And I've heard that it's awesome, but you do kind of have to work through it. Like there's some times when it's kind of a slog, or it's kind of slow, or places that people are like, it was a really good book, but like there were sections of it that were a little exhausting. That intimidates me, but I don't really know why, because I am a fantasy reader, and I'm used to being like, listen, like this series is so good, but like half of it's terrible, but it's worth it. Like I can do this. I can read The Count of Monte Cristo. Next up is nonfiction, and I used to read a lot of nonfiction actually. Like in my big break of my early 20s all the way to like my mid 30s, where I really didn't classify myself as a reader, as an avid reader. I would still read some nonfiction. Again, it was probably only like 10 books a year, but I did read nonfiction, and it was mostly biographies, and I don't like calling them self-help books because that sounds pretty lame, but you know, like personal development type books. And I do like them. I wish I read more of them still because I miss them and I enjoy them. But the one I picked for like, why haven't you read that yet, is Empire of the Summer Moon by S.C. Gwynn. I don't know his first name. But the reason I categorize this is like, why haven't you read this yet, is because my brother has been recommending this to me and kind of like riding me about it for years now. He's been like, have you picked up that book yet? You really are going to like it. This is a book about the Comanche Indian tribe, excuse me. And it is like, it is nonfiction, but it is like a historical telling of the history and the rise and the downfall of the Comanche tribe. But then there's a secondary side to it where it's about this woman who was kidnapped by the Comanche tribe when she was a child, and then, you know, like raised within the tribe, and then her son, who is half Comanche, half kidnapped pioneer woman, ends up being like the last great Indian chief of the Comanche tribe. But my brother sold it to me by saying like, yeah, it's nonfiction. It is a historical retelling, but it reads like a novel. He said it was absolutely gripping and just had the craziest story. And he's like, everything you think you know about this part of history, like get ready to just have your entire perspective shaken up because it's crazy. And I, for one, like I was born and raised in Oklahoma, and I have a lot of interest and a lot of passion for Native American history. So I'm very, very excited to get to this. And the reason it has a bookmark in it, and the reason actually that it has 2 bookmarks in it, is I got my husband to agree to read this with me today. Like before I even was tagged in this video or like thought about this list, earlier today, I was like, hey, like, I've been meaning to read this for a long time. Would you like to read it with me? And he said yes, so we're going to read it at the same time. So we got 2 bookmarks here. I'm going to give him this one with a little fur on the top, and I'm going to keep this unicorn one for myself. And we're both going to read it and just kind of like take turns with it, I think, and then have a discussion. This book was made really popular several years ago by Joe Rogan. He like read it and went nuts on it. And apparently it was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, so like it's a big deal. I'm really excited to get to it. Okay, now for genre fiction, this one was a little bit tougher for me to narrow it down because I'm a genre girl. I love genre fiction. But after I thought about it for just a second and I went by my rule of stuff I already own, it was really easy for me to pick. I went with Ken Follett, Pillars of the Earth. This is a book that I honestly didn't know that much about. Like, I am kind of new to the reading world, okay? I don't know everything. I don't know all the authors, all the must-read books. But this is one that someone within my circle of reading friends read this several months ago. And they were like, oh my gosh, it was so good. And then all of a sudden, everyone else joined the conversation. Like, literally, I was looking around like, am I the only one who hasn't read this book? Because everyone else was like, oh, when I read that, it changed my life. It was so good, so good, so good. And I'm like, what? Like, what do I know about this book? So I bought it, like, immediately, because everyone was going nuts about it. And I just assumed it was fantasy, but it's actually historical fiction. And I really don't know that much about it, but I do know that it is like Dark Ages, like true medieval England, and that is an easy button for me. I love it. And I don't normally do this on videos because I feel like anybody can read the back of a dust jacket, but I am going to read this because it sounds so up my alley. It says, with this book, Ken Follett risks all and comes out a clear winner. A historical novel of gripping readability, authentic atmosphere, and memorable characterization. Beginning with the mystery that casts its shadow, the narrative is a seesaw of tension, suspense, impeccable pacing, action, intrigue, violence, passion, greed, bravery, dedication, revenge, love. A novel that entertains, instructs, and satisfies on a grand scale. I mean, like, I should be reading this right now. This sounds like exactly like my new favorite book. So that's definitely my pick. And the very last question is, what is the book that's been on your shelf the longest? Let me look how it's actually worded. Book you've owned the longest but haven't read yet. And this one was also pretty easy for me. So the way my story goes, like I have a deep-rooted love for fantasy and reading in general, but I took a very, 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 very long hiatus and read almost nothing fiction. And when I got back into reading, I discovered BookTube. And the year that I really got back into reading was like late in 2019. And everyone was talking about this series by Mark Lawrence, Red Sister. It's called, what is the name of the series called? Book of the Ancestor. Book 1 is Red Sister. And pretty much sight unseen, I knew very little about it, except for, so like I said, it was towards the end of 2019. So everyone was doing their end of the year wrap-ups and top 10 list of the year. And this book just kept popping up, or the series rather, kept popping up on all the booktubers lists. So I ordered it. I ordered all 3 of them. And then for some reason, for no reason, honestly, I haven't read it yet. I've read hundreds of books since then, but I haven't read this. And it was really one of the first things I bought when I came back around to reading. So no more excuses. Please convince me to read this. I would like to read this series before the year is up. I don't know that I will, but I 100% will make it a priority in 2023 if I don't get to it, because I really do want to read it. And every time I see it, I think, why haven't you read that series yet? So that definitely fits the bill. So those were all the questions. That was a really fun tag. Thank you, Scott, for tagging me. It's a short tag, so if you want to just join in the comments and let me know what are some books that you own, or maybe you don't own, that every time it crosses your mind, you're like, why haven't I read that yet?